You can spend way too much time on your drums if you don't have an organized way to go about it. So in today's video, we're going to talk about how I streamline my drum process when I'm making a track. Before we get started with the video, my name is John from Sandscape Audio. We're a music production resource community, and we post content like this all the time, so make sure you're subscribed here. One of the problems I see a lot is people spend way too much time picking a particular sound for a kick or a snare or a hi-hat or anything like that. There are only so many different sounds in the world, and you spending 3 hours trying to get the perfect kick isn't going to be very productive. So what I recommend is taking the time to pick all of your kicks, snares, hi-hats, claps, things like that, organize them into a folder, and then reference that folder when you're making your track. Usually 10 to 15 sounds in each category is plenty. Once I have a folder full of the sounds that I really like, I very rarely get away from those. So if we go up here to the top right corner in Logic and we click on this little button here, this will bring up our file browser. So I have one folder here of my favorite sounds, very appropriately named. And in that folder, I have my favorite claps, my favorite hats, my favorite kicks, my favorite snares, and my favorite toms. So if we go into one of these folders here, you'll see I have a very limited amount of files. I believe it's just 12 in this one, something like that. So I have 12 kicks that I can choose from. And we can go through and hear what they all sound like. So a pretty decent range of kick sounds. Now I get it, your taste may change a little bit and you may find that the sounds are getting a little stale to you. So it's okay to every couple months go in and change out those sounds and pick a different 12. I would only do that every couple months if you feel like your sounds are lacking a little bit. So when it's time to start building the drum tracks, we can go in here and pick a sound, and we could just drag it over to our project here. But there's a couple problems with that. One, it takes a while to drag over all your sounds to wherever you need them. Two, it's tough to audition sounds. So if you pick one that you think sounds good for your drum beat, and then you start producing your whole song and you realize that that's not really the kick you wanted to use, then you have to go through and change it all. So I'm never just going to drop the audio file into the project like that. What I do is I make a sampler instrument so I can use the files as MIDI and go through and audition them and place them where I want. It's super simple to add your audio files into a sampler instrument, so we're going to try that right now. All you got to do is go into Logic, open up a sampler instrument on one of your tracks, open up your mapping section in your sampler, and you'll see this kind of piano roll down here. Select all the files that you want to add into the sampler and drag them over. Now in most cases you want each sample to only take up one note, and if you look here you could see that the higher we go up on the piano roll, the more notes each sample is taking up. And that's going to change the pitch of the sample as you play it throughout the different notes. But like I said, most of the time you just want each sample on its own individual note. So you're going to drag close down to the piano keys until it shows each one on an individual note, and then release. There we go. Now when we play our MIDI notes, we'll hear that each sample has its own key. You can also hear that some of the samples are cutting out a little bit, and that's because the sample is only playing for as long as the key is being held. The way we fix that is by going into Zone, selecting the note, and hitting one shot. Now we don't have to hold the key, and the sample will play all the way through. All right, so let's add in the rest of our sounds here. All right, now we have all of our samples in one sampler instrument right here, so we can go ahead and start making our drums. So you can either use one track to make your entire drum pattern, or you can make multiple tracks and put each instrument on its own track. I'm just going to use one track for now because later on we're going to talk about how we split those tracks to get all the MIDI on its own individual track. All right, here we go. Let's lay something down real quick. All right, now we have something super simple. Sounds like this. And if we decide that we don't like one of the sounds, we can just select it here and move it to a different note. And that's kind of what I was talking about when I said you can audition different sounds when it's in MIDI. Now, once we get to the mixing process, it's not going to be very helpful to have all of these drum instruments on one track. So the best thing to do is to split them out so you can adjust them independently. The way we're going to do that is by control clicking on the region. Scroll down here to convert and separate by note pitch. So as you can see, it took all of the MIDI note pitches and put them into their own separate track, depending on what pitch the note was. The problem with this is even though you separated the tracks, Logic still puts them in the same channel strip, so you can't edit them independently. If I were to try to solo one of these tracks, they all solo. So there's a really simple solution for this. All you have to do is select all your tracks, hold down Option, and drag all the tracks right below. You'll get a copy made of each track. You'll see now they can be individually soloed or muted. And then you can just go ahead and delete all of these other ones. Now you can see each note has its own individual track. So if we were to solo out one of these, you only hear that track. If there's any instance where you didn't want Logic to take two of the note pitches and put them on separate tracks, all you have to do is select those two tracks. So I have the open and closed hi-hat here. And we just select them and hit Command J for join. And now they're both on that one track. And you can obviously go through and name all of these to make it easier to organize and work through. And then even after the tracks are split into their own MIDI note pitch, you can still go in and change the pitch to change the sample. Once you're happy with all your drum sounds and the arrangement and you're ready to mix, it's a smart idea to bounce out the tracks. That way you commit and you don't waste time going back and forth changing anything. And the way we do that is Control-click, bounce in place. You can name it appropriately. And then once we do that, we can delete the MIDI file. Now we have our kick. We can go through and do that for all of our tracks. And there we go. Now all of our drum sounds are on their own individual audio track. Another reason why you might want to bounce out your MIDI drums into audio tracks is because if you plan on doing what we talked about in the beginning of the video, where you're switching out your sounds every couple months, if you go into that same sampler instrument and you change out the audio files, and then you try to go back to a project that you used an old audio sample in, that sampler instrument won't be able to find the audio and it won't play in your track. So if you're trying to reference tracks from like a year ago that you've worked on to see what you did in a certain situation, you may find that you're missing some sounds because they were still in MIDI and you deleted the audio file that was associated with that MIDI note. So if we have them in audio and down the line somewhere we decide to change that sampler and put in a different audio track, our past projects won't be affected because they're already bounced out into audio. Just something to think about when you're combining audio samples with MIDI and sampler instruments. So there it is, just a simple way to make drums in Logic in an effective way. I'd say the biggest takeaway is to not spend too much time going through thousands of kicks and thousands of snares to try to get that perfect sound. The reality is that the average listener isn't really going to be able to tell the difference between 1,000 different kicks, so don't waste your time choosing the best one. Pick 10 to 15 and always go back to those in every project that you're working on. Now, obviously, if there's a unique sound that you're going for, maybe you want to throw in a different one occasionally, that's okay. But a general rule of thumb is to stick with the ones that you already have in your folder and in your sampler instrument. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe here so you can keep up with all the content that we release. Also, feel free to head over to sandscapeaudio.com to check out some of the resources that we have available over there. All right, y'all, that's it for this one. I'll catch you in the next one.